Good morning and welcome to our webinar on Concerned About Your Forgetful Neighbor. So thank you so much for joining us today for the Dementia Friendly Fairfax webinar. Dementia Friendly Fairfax's initiative started in July of 2019 through a partnership with Goodwin House, Insight Memory Care Center, and Fairfax County. And Dementia Friendly Fairfax envisions our community as a place where people living with dementia and their care partners will be able to engage in activities, be supported in the highest quality of life, and can live independently as long as possible. And Dementia Friendly is looking to grow our action team. So if you are interested in learning more about Dementia Friendly, please contact myself or or contact Insight Memory Care Center, the website that you'll receive at the end of this webinar. Feel free to reach out to us and we would love to have you be part of it. Now let me introduce your two trainers today. You have Lindsay Vajpai and Karen Hannigan. So Lindsay is the Director of Education and Outreach at Insight Memory Care Center. Lindsay has dedicated her career to working with older adults who live with dementia and their caregivers. Her certifications include Certified Dementia Practitioner, Certified Alzheimer's Disease and Dementia Care Trainer, Activity Director certification with specialization in memory care, and is a Master Trainer with a Best Friends approach to dementia care. And Karen Hannigan is a licensed clinical social worker who has worked within the field of adult protective services in various roles and states over 25 years. Currently, she is the supervisor of Fairfax County's Aging, Disability, and Caregiver Resource Unit, or intake. This is a unit of 7 social workers who perform primarily telephone intake for all services related to long-term care for those who need it, as well as for all the reports of abuse, neglect, and exploitation for vulnerable adults within Fairfax County. So you are in good hands today with 2 very qualified trainers. So let me turn it over to Lindsay to start your webinar.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Glad that you can be here, and I'm excited to be with you. I wanted to share a few housekeeping tips about this webinar before we actually launch into the class. If you're listening live, you are in listen-only mode, so we don't see or hear you. If you find that your control panel is a little bit in the way, you can click that orange horizontal arrow to move it off to the side. If you have questions throughout today's training, feel free to enter them into that questions box in your control panel, and Robin will be keeping an eye on those, and we will take some time for Q&A at the end. You can access the handouts for today's training under the handout section of the control panel. You just open that up, click on today's handouts, and then you can choose to save them, print them, do whatever you'd like. And if you are a registered attendee, you will receive a link to the recording in a follow-up email. So again, glad that you're with us. I want to just set the stage a little bit for today's topic. There are over 5 million Americans living with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia, and chances are at least one of them is your neighbor, or in your neighborhood, or in your building, or on your street. And we know that the number of people living with dementia grows each year. In Virginia alone, between the year 2020, right now, and 2025, we're expecting the number of people living with dementia to grow by over 26%. So this is something that even if it hasn't been an issue that's really crossed your path yet, it probably will in the future. And I venture to guess that if you're listening to this webinar today, it is because you're concerned about a family member, a friend, a neighbor, someone in your social circle or an acquaintance. Now, one of the things that's a bit different right now, being still, sort of in this pandemic time, support systems have really changed. So let's say your neighbor is experiencing some cognitive change. Previously, they may have had some supports in place, such as family members who might stop by every day or a couple times a week. Maybe they had caregivers like companions from home care agencies who would come into their home. Maybe they had even housekeeping, or other kinds of services, that might come into the home that just aren't there right now. Also, if this person was engaging in other kinds of activity that's currently closed, they don't have the same social outlets. So maybe your neighbor was going to the local senior center, to an adult day program, to exercise classes at the gym, or programs through a faith community, and those things aren't happening. So it may be that there are sort of less supports there, less eyes less kind of helping hands for this person that you may be concerned about. And we know that the stigma of dementia is still very present. You know, Dementia Friendly Fairfax and other organizations locally and around the country are working to lessen this stigma, to help us all feel more comfortable interacting and supporting a person in our community who lives with dementia. But we know that stigma is still there. So for example, you may be a little bit concerned about a neighbor. You know, there's sort of something on your radar saying, this just isn't quite right, I'm a little bit concerned, but no one has actually shared any information with you. It may be that that person who's experiencing the cognitive changes is hesitant to tell you. It may be even that family members or friends are a little bit hesitant to share this kind of information if they don't have the permission of the person, you know, who's living with this disease. So it may feel like, as a neighbor, I know that there are needs out there. You know, I know that I'm feeling a little bit concerned, but I don't really know that I have the tools or the information to truly be helpful or to even know what to do if a concern arises. So I'm going to share this in the first part of today's presentation, kind of understanding some of the warning signs that you might see in a neighbor that might indicate that they're living with some cognitive change, and also some ways to best communicate with that person. And then we'll pivot into Karen's section of the presentation, which will focus more on, okay, now what do you do if you have a concern? Who do you call, and what's that process like? So first, normal aging, dementia. So I'm just going to quickly recap definitions here in case you haven't been in some of the previous webinars. Dementia means there are cognitive changes that are occurring that are significantly interfering with daily life. They are not normal aging. It's something more than that. You know, they're really things that are starting to become concerning that might change someone's ability to live safely and independently. So normal aging, we might all experience, you know, as we grow older, like our bodies are changing, so are our brains. So normal aging, you might forget, you know, kind of a minor detail, something, you know, I was supposed to pick up some bread on the way home, I forgot to do that. You know, you forget some recently learned information, but you remember things that are really important. You know, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, right? Or there's a big election coming up this fall, or whatever those important things might be to you. You know, in normal aging, we might walk into a room, forget what we went in there for, but then we remember, we go back and we do it. We might once in a while kind of lose track of what day of the week it is, especially right now when we have kind of less markers throughout the week, but we can figure it out, right? We have our days and nights, you know, kind of on track. We know what's what. We're able to use all of the appliances around our house without any difficulty. You know, if I get a new cell phone, there might be a learning curve there, but all the regular things that we do from day to day, really, there aren't any specific challenges. You know, we might once in a while feel a little bit weary from work or social obligations, but it doesn't actually get in the way of our ability to engage in those things when we know that we need to. You know, so there are a number of different changes that can take place for all of us as we age, and lots of reasons for those kinds of changes to occur or to kind of seem exacerbated, right? If I don't get enough sleep, if I feel a lot of stress, if I have depression that's not being addressed, you know, there are lots of reasons why I might feel a little bit more forgetful, you know, than I think I should. But again, normal aging, this is not getting in the way of everyday life. And then there are some signs of dementia. So I should mention that this list is from the Alzheimer's Association, 10 early signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So signs of dementia, you know, again, things that are really starting to get in the way of daily life. They are becoming a pattern, not like a fluke or a just once in a great while. Things that are starting to become noticeable. Memory loss that disrupts daily life, especially short-term memory loss. You know, forgetting about recent conversations, things that have happened, you know, in the last few minutes, hours, weeks, months, maybe the last few years. It's only much later on in the disease process that that long-term memory would become affected. Another sign would be challenges in planning and solving problems, you know, kind of deciding what to do, in what order to go through those steps, how to deal with a problem that might arise. Another sign would be difficulty completing familiar tasks at home or work or leisure. Things like balancing your checkbook, setting up appointments, using your microwave, driving to familiar locations, those sorts of things. Another warning sign would be confusion with time or place, getting days and nights mixed up, becoming really disoriented in new locations. Another warning sign, trouble understanding images and spatial relationships. So really what I mean by this is like difficulty determining depth. When there's like not a lot of color contrast, for example, like when you approach a set of stairs and they're all the same color, the person whose brain is changing may not recognize that there's going to be a change in depth there. The next warning sign, new problems with words in speaking or writing, some word finding difficulty engaging in a conversation, following a written set of instructions and understanding written content. Another sign, misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. We all might lose things sometimes, but the issue here is when you can't retrace your steps and probably find that missing item. Normal aging, I might misplace my phone or my keys, and then I think back to, well, where was I in the last few minutes, or the last time I had that item, what was I doing? I'll probably find it. When someone's experiencing dementia, it's really hard for the brain to kind of work backwards, to go through those steps, to remember the things that happened over those last few minutes or hours since I last had that item. Another warning sign, decreased or poor judgment, really making bad decisions. And again, this is not like a once in a great while, like, oh, I really shouldn't have, bought that pool for my backyard, I couldn't afford it, like a small one, but really poor judgment on a broader scale happening much more frequently, spending money on things I really can't afford, and that's different for me, right? It's different than my baseline. The next warning sign, withdrawal from work or social activities, pulling back from the things that person used to do. And then the last warning sign, changes in mood or personality, becoming more confused, more irritable, more anxious, again, changes that are starting to become a pattern. They're concerning, they're different than that person's norm, from their baseline. But I want to kind of zero this in a little bit. Well, so what does this actually mean in my neighbor? Like what would I actually notice in my neighbor? You might notice some noticeable short-term memory loss. For example, maybe you met up on the sidewalk, you had a conversation about something, and then a couple hours later, you see this neighbor again outside, and it seems that they don't recall talking to you recently. They're sharing the same information with you again, or asking you the same questions again. Or you might notice your neighbor, maybe they get home, they're bringing in groceries, they've got the car door open, and they don't remember to go out and close it, right? Or the garage door is open and they don't remember to go out and close it. And again, we all do that kind of thing like once in a while, but if this is really a pattern and this is a change from what's normal for your neighbor, you might notice periods of confusion. You can even see it on that person's face sometimes, that they're just thinking like the pieces aren't lining up. Maybe it's, what am I supposed to be doing next? How do I solve a problem when it arises? You just kind of see that confusion start to build. Maybe your neighbor is experiencing some delusional thoughts, which are false beliefs. They may believe that something happened that really didn't, thinking that someone came into their house and stole all their belongings and everything appears to be there, or thinking that a visitor came, yesterday who really didn't. Really just kind of having beliefs that just don't fit reality. You might also see in your neighbor some difficulty with kind of regular tasks and activities. Maybe it's something like, mowing the lawn, and you notice they're really having difficulty with that. There's a lot of change, right? They're not able to kind of work through what to do, and maybe the lawnmower runs out the middle of the yard. Maybe they're not thinking about going to fill it up with gas. Just things that used to be kind of normal for them, they're starting to have a lot of difficulty. Maybe it's with parking the car, right? And they're really, bumping into things, those sorts of changes. You might notice a change in their mood or their personality. Maybe they're, much more irritable than they used to be, or they seem much more kind of worried or anxious, some kind of change that again is a bit different, something that kind of raises those red flags for you. You might notice, as you're interacting with your neighbor and talking with them, there's more difficulty finding the right words. Again, we might all once in a while, we can't think of the word we want to say. What's the name of that restaurant? Are they open yet? But this is when it really starts to become a pattern. And you might notice some difficulty, like they're getting stuck in the conversation. Maybe they're describing things rather than naming them, or the words that they're using just aren't quite fitting. You might notice just generally that they're not participating in conversation with you as easily or as readily. Maybe they're a bit more quiet in conversation. They're giving you those kind of empty answers like, beautiful day, isn't it? Or you ask a question and they say, oh, I think so, right? They're not really giving you content, details. You might notice in your neighbor that there are some unsafe situations happening. Again, maybe it's like with parking the car and they're like bumping into other cars or scraping the side of the garage. Maybe unsafe situations like they leave their door, wide open. That when they're outside doing something, you just notice them really kind of losing balance and just not using good kind of safety protocols in their daily routine. And the last thing you might see in your neighbor is some really noticeable changes in their behavior or their routine. So for example, maybe you notice your neighbor's light is on in the middle of the night, right? On a fairly regular basis, and that was not the case before. Or maybe they used to go out and pick up that paper bright and early in the morning, and now you notice that it's sitting out there till 11 or 12, right? Some kinds of changes that you just think, gosh, that just isn't normal, right? That's not what's normal for my neighbor. These are some of the things that you might look for. But I want to talk a little bit too about communication. So maybe I notice some of these changes with my neighbor. It's not your job to make a diagnosis, but you still want to know, how do I communicate well with this person? Some of the things that you want to do to best communicate with a person who's experiencing some of the warning signs that we talked about, some of those kind of red flags you might see. You might provide a little bit of orienting information at the beginning of your conversation. Saying what your name is, giving a little bit of context to what you're about to talk about. So let's see, an example might be, instead of just walking up to someone and say, well, that was really something, wasn't it? What was something, right? Maybe you're saying, oh, there was that fire truck that went down our street a little while ago. I wonder where they were going, right? Adding a little more detail into your conversation. Or I have a neighbor who's I can tell he's experiencing some memory loss. I have no idea if he has a diagnosis, but one of the things I notice, or that I'll do, is when I talk about my kids, he'll ask questions about my kids, and I always make sure to kind of reference their names or their ages, just like details that helps him interact with them a little bit better, right? Just giving a little bit of information, taking that person off the hook, just kind of discreetly providing. Another thing to do is to make sure you're giving eye contact and listening carefully. Instead of kind of maybe working in your flower garden and you're trying to talk to somebody over here, but you're looking over there, just taking your attention and giving it to that person. Making sure that you have that eye contact and that you're listening really carefully. Maybe your neighbor is trying to share something with you, a concern, something that they're worried about, and wanting to make sure that you are there and present and can be that kind of trusted support person for your neighbor. You might want to help that person fill in the blanks. So let's say you are having a conversation in the hallway and you notice this person is struggling to come up with the word that they want to say. I wouldn't kind of rush right in and sort of cut that person off to make the conversation go faster, but supply the word if you think you know what that person is trying to say, really helping them feel comfortable in the conversation. You also want to read facial expressions and body language. What is their face showing? Do they look like they're really like worried about something, that they're scared of something, or is it nice, kind of relaxed, fun-loving body language, facial expression, and what does their body language look like? Is there anything to indicate signs of abuse or pain or a physical need? Maybe you notice this person, just maybe not so much body language, but you notice, they're really pale or they seem like they're losing weight, and kind of taking that into consideration when you're talking with that person. You want to keep language really simple. I'm not saying talk like you're talking to a child, I'm not saying use baby talk, anything that's disrespectful. I'm just saying, like, be really clear and straightforward in the things that you're saying. You know, maybe using a little bit more basic vocabulary, you know, just making sure you're really getting to the point instead of beating around the bush in your conversation. And also you want to talk in kind of an easygoing, friendly manner, you know, being relaxed. And if you're feeling kind of calm, pleasant, friendly, that's going to rub off on the other person, right? And it's going to help them feel more kind of relaxed and easygoing in that conversation too. Some of the things that we don't want to do, we don't want to argue or confront or correct that person, right? If someone is experiencing some cognitive change, you know, memory loss, judgment changes, they may sort of share details or facts about something that you know are just not true. That is just not even possible, or you know what the real deal is. It's okay. Just let it go. It doesn't matter. You know, unless it's like a true safety issue or you know you got to get on the same page. Just let it be. Don't argue about anything. You know, don't correct. We don't want to make demands or give orders. You know, you really need to take care of that such and such. You know, it's going to stink up the hallway. Or we have to be really mindful of our tone of voice and the way that we're communicating to not kind of put up that wall and close off that communication. We don't want to talk down to the person or talk about them like they're not there, right? So include that person in the conversation, even if they have, you know, someone who may be a caregiver with them, like a spouse or another family member or even a paid caregiver. We still want to talk to that person directly, right? Not talk about them like they're not there when in fact they're standing right there. We always want to use that tone of respect and be inclusive. We don't want to ask questions that rely on recent memory or that rely on knowing too many facts, right? So one of the things that I suggest to really never say is, don't you remember? Don't you remember? We talked about this a little while ago. Don't you remember? I already told you. If we're suspecting that this person has memory loss, we have to be the ones to say, well, I can't expect them to remember something that I've said or that happened recently. You know, I'm suspecting that there's a memory impairment here. So we have to find different ways to communicate that doesn't rely so much on those recent memories or on, you know, facts that just may be more difficult for that person to keep straight. And then we also don't want to take negative comments personally. You know, for someone whose brain is changing, when their frontal lobe is changing, that's when they're losing that ability to control their emotions. You know, where they're losing that kind of ability to know what you're, you know, what's socially appropriate and what's not. You know, empathy is in that part of the brain. That kind of filter of what to say and what to do, these are things that are changing. So if your loved one does say something that kind of catches you off guard, you know, saying something that's kind of negative or accusatory, really trying not to take those things personally. Just kind of take it all in stride, go with the flow, and if you need to pivot away from the conversation, you know, to not escalate, then maybe that's what you need to do. So we've talked through a number of different communication tips, but let's say you have some real concerns, right? It's not just about, you know, how do I best interact, but what if there's something going on that I'm really concerned about? So I'd like to invite Karen into the presentation to take it from here.
Thank you, Lindsay. Oh, can everybody see me? Yeah.
Yes.
Lindsay, thank you very much. That was a great beginning. I think it feels to me like you may have been reading a lot of our Adult Protective Services reports, because we do get a lot from neighbors, and they have seen, I think, almost every single scenario that you've gone through about what's going on in the neighborhood has been reported to us by concerned citizens. So I'm here from Fairfax County, and I supervise the unit that receives the calls. So if you as a neighbor are going to make a call, it's going to be my social workers and myself who talk you through the process. And what's really great about Fairfax is we have one central intake unit, which is mine. And so you call a number. I'm going to say this a few times during this presentation, and it's 703-324-7450. So 703-324-7450. That number is active 24/7 every single day. We're here 8 to 4:30 to receive these reports that I'm going to talk to you about. But after hours, it goes down to Richmond. And one of us, in fact, me this month, is on call to receive after hours reports that might be of an urgent nature. So think of us as always being here. The citizens of Fairfax pay our salaries, and we can talk through things. It's not a formal, it doesn't have to be a formal report. You can just say, I have concerns. And you call us, and we're going to ask you questions and talk it through. So I just want to make sure that if you're on the fence and you've seen all these things happening, a lot of the things that Lindsay was saying, weight loss, clients whose cars are now dinged up all the time, that sense of vagueness, the confusion about medications, that you give us a call. And what we're going to try to do is support the person, keep them at home, and get them safer. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Adult Protective Services in Fairfax. We're a big group, and last year we investigated about 1,200 reports of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of people 18 to 59 who are unable to take care of themselves for various reasons, or 60 and above. Now, the vast majority of those reports were for self-neglect, which I think from Lindsay's presentation is more what you're going to be seeing. You never know, it could be neglect or abuse by family members, but across the nation, about half of reports are of self-neglect. A lot of people equate child protective service with adult protective services, but right there you see a very large difference. Children can't self-neglect, older adults can. And of course, the determination of what is neglect, well, that's going to be interesting, and that's what the social workers will go out. Lindsay was also talking a lot about baselines. You neighbors are amazing with telling us social workers what someone's baseline is and what their norm, everybody's norms are all over about their capacity to do what. And a lot of what we're going to do out there is do our own capacity assessments ourselves, because we've done this for a long time. And your reports and your history is going to be critical. So most of it's self-neglect. About half of them, a little bit less, were substantiated. That means we go out, we do an investigation. The investigation takes 45 days. We have 5 days to go out, the calendar days, to go out to see the person. 45 days to do an investigation. In that time period, normally we care about consent, and we're not going to call anybody that you, if you call us for services that you don't want us to call. In those 45 days with Adult Protective Services, we have this window where we can talk to a neighbor, and you can speak to us, and we'll protect you. You can stay anonymous. We won't tell the older adult that we had that conversation. But the expectation is that the doctor of the older adult, the children of the older adult, that they will respond to our questions in those 45 days while we're in our investigative period. So let's see what it's, so 80% were 60 and above, so the vast majority are older adults, and 64% were female, 36% were male. And you can understand why due to the aging of the population. And next slide. So our goal, I want to be very clear that if you call us, Adult Protective Services sounds a little frightening. I want to take that away. We're not police. We're social workers, all of us. And we have a mandate. And what our mandate is, and it's in law, is to try to stop or prevent the abuse, neglect, or exploitation by protecting the adult with the least restriction of his or her liberty. So I believe, and so do most of my colleagues here, we have 4 different Adult Protective Services supervisors in the different regions, and then I'm the intake person, that there is no such thing as safety. As we can see what's going on with our nursing homes and assisted livings during the COVID period, there is no such thing as complete safety for any of us. But what we want to do is harm reduction. So we're not going to go in there and totally change a life that your neighbor has created for him or herself. We are going to look at areas of harm reduction for them. And we're all, to every single one of us, a big believer of staying in the community, in their own homes, and not transitioning out of them. So we're going to assess the ability of that person to stay in their home as long as possible. We're going to link the adult to the necessary resources. They're taxpayers too, right? So we have resources. We're very fortunate to have home health aides that we can send in potentially for absolutely no cost for them to do the housekeeping and the laundry. If the concern is that they might fall down the stairs because that's where the washing machine is, we are going to try to mitigate that risk by providing services to them. When we do out-of-home placement, it's very, very rare. Of that 1,200 cases that we investigated, only 10 went for guardianship. And that probably means it's someone with no family, maybe a neighbor who did report, and the dementia has gotten to the point, or other issues have gotten to the point that the risk, the harm reduction cannot make them safe enough, and they're very much at risk of dying or losing a limb. I mean, it has to be pretty extreme before we're going to go to the level of going to court to petition to get guardianship and conservatorship and remove them from the home. So extremely rare that would be the consequence. Next slide. So a valid report, when you call, I'm going to be thinking through validity of the report. You know, could we do this? Do we have to do an investigation? Can we do it differently and send out services that the client agrees to, like Adult Day? Now, of course, with COVID, those are closed. One of my favorite programs is Adult Day Healthcare. They're amazing. And then the in-home care that I'm talking about, Meals on Wheels. There's counselors that will actually go out into the home, and if someone's early in their dementia, that can still be a possibility to do some counseling with folks. So we have a wide range of in-home services. So what I'm going to be listening for is, do I have to make this a report at all? Again, you could be anonymous, but the best thing is for us to know who you are so that the Adult Protective Services worker can go back and talk to you, but keep you away from your neighbor. A lot of times, I know I wouldn't want my neighbor to know that I made that call, and we will absolutely keep you confidential from your neighbor or anyone else. Any reporter is not allowed to be given to people, even if they subpoena our paperwork. We must redact the reporter's name. That's by law. It's very tight. So, but we must be able to find the person. You may not even know their name if it happens to be someone who's homeless in the neighborhood. But we have to be able to find them. We have to have the abuse, neglect, and exploitation as part of our definition, and it has to be in Fairfax County. And I'll define now in the next slides what abuse, neglect, or exploitation means. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. So abuse, as you would expect, is the willful infliction of pain, injury, or mental anguish, or confining someone. That can be tough. I know we've had some cases of people with Alzheimer's and dementia in Fairfax where the loved one thought they were being protective in locking an older adult in their room in their condo while they went out to work. And then the older adult lifted up the window and was yelling for help. And so that's not going to work. That person didn't know that adult daycares existed, though, so we could say, hey, we got a better option. But kicking, punching, slapping, hitting, shoving, those kinds of things. You'd look on your side, you'd look for bruises or burns, or older adults do bruise very easily, so that can be difficult, but you see something that's different. Sprains, fractures, cuts, slurring of the words might be part of being over medicated. Purposeful isolation or confinement, like I was talking to you, improper use of restraints. That person who locked his grandmother in there, that is restraining, and we can't do that. Sexual assault or coercion, that I have to report directly to the police immediately, and they'll be our partners in this. And then the verbal, that might be what you see or hear more often. That's a problem too, and that would be considered abuse. And so the next definition is neglect. That's much more common. So I said self-neglect was about 50%. The second most common report is of neglect by others. That's probably about 20%. So now we're up to 70% of it. And that is where the child, adult child, or friend, or either blood relative or fictive kin are trying to take care of someone, and their abilities vary and their emotional states vary. And so we're seeing some problems with the bed sores or unsafe living conditions, no utilities. In Fairfax, you cannot live without these utilities, heat, electricity, or water. That is against code here. It may not be in other places, but here, code enforcement can come in and take a look at that. So we partner with them a lot, especially with our cases of hoarding disorder. And we have a committee that works together very much with that, the living conditions. And then inadequate supervision. Are they walking? I'd say not a month goes by that someone isn't bound by police and police are calling us and they have wandered off, and what's going on. And the police will handle the immediacy, but then Adult Protective Services or my team will reach out to the family later and talk about services that they often don't know exist. And the neglect that threatens the client's health or safety. So we're always going to look at the risk for the older adult, because there's always risk in life, but is it going up? Is it going down? What's our level? And the capacity. When we talk about capacity with dementia, I always like to say capacity to do what? So someone with dementia that's your neighbor can still be very intact and be able to make certain decisions and be unable to make others. And we social workers get a lot of training on how to assess that. And we have partners, a psychologist who will go out and do an assessment for us, as well as a nurse, about capacity. Risk capacity evaluation is the lens that we're always looking at it. Not to blame anybody. These caregivers need support too. Okay, next slide. Oh, exploitation. So our third most common report, and this is new probably of the last 3 or 4 years because banks are not mandatory reporters in Virginia, but they're voluntarily reporting quite a lot. And we get a lot of reports about this doesn't seem right regarding the money. Again, very different from child protective. So this is our third most common. I think it's about 12% now. We're seeing a lot of this. Scammers from the outside, yes, and we will send those forward. So if your neighbor is talking about winning the sweepstakes and it's just going to hit any time now, or the romance scams, we see that a lot. And I know I just had to give him some more money. His daughter's sick. We just have to get the surgery done, then he could fly over here after COVID, but I need to give more money. That is a very good report to make for us. We will go out and try to talk to them about what's the purpose of that money, because our belief as social workers is there's some need under there to be meaningful in this world, and people with dementia or Alzheimer's have that same need to have a purpose. So we're going to see what is going on. Is somebody taking advantage of that natural need and that early dementia? So there's all types of exploitation, and the things we get in, the ones that I will send forward for investigation are most often those that involve family members. So there's an emotional element and a history here. And so we have to get deeply into that and into the value systems of clients, because money is that's a big one. That's a trigger, but we want to make sure that they're going to be safe for their lives and not give it all away. Next slide. Incapacity. All right. So dementia for us is one way that someone can be incapacitated, and is probably the most common. There are some others, which are mental illness, intellectual disability, physical illness, and then the dementia or cognitive challenges. Now, physical, I'll just take a second. That's someone who might have maybe a quadriplegic, can't get out of bed, wants a glass of water, is capacitated, can think it through, but can't physically get that water. That would be someone who is unable to advocate for self and would qualify for our services. There's another thing, if some people are in a domestic violence situation, and unfortunately, I'm sure people know about these or have some experience with that, in your neighborhood, if they've been in a domestic violence situation for a while, a marriage, and they were 59, then suddenly they turned 60, and you call and we talk it through, there's probably still a choice there. But when the dementia gets so much that someone can't make a choice, then we can maybe do a little bit more. So just because someone turns 60, that's our number, that is less important to us than their functional ability. So they have to lack sufficient understanding or ability to make, communicate, or carry out reasonable decisions regarding his or her well-being. When you make a report, like Lindsay was talking about the things you saw, and hopefully she crystallized some thoughts that you may have if you come across this. Her words are words that you can use to filter through I'm feeling strange about this. What is it? Oh yeah, let me go back to that chart. This is him, this isn't him. It would be great if you had that kind of thinking when you called us, but it's absolutely not necessary. We can tease it out. But what I would want to know is if I had a video camera on your neighbor and you guys were having a conversation, how did he respond to certain things? Because people have high social skills and they will mask that dementia, but you see things that are worrying you. So what are those? So a lot of times we'll ask a lot of questions about capacity when you make the phone call. You don't have to be an assessor like Lindsay said, but you're a fantastic observer and you're an impartial observer. So you're critical to our investigations and to keeping people safe, or I should say harm reduction. Next slide. Yeah, they can make bad decisions. Older adults have a right to do a whole host of things in the United States, right? So even unfortunately to remain in an abusive situation, or what's very frustrating for families, when say one child never left the house or left the house and came back, never really launched well, and that's the child that the older adult remains protective of and living in the house, and that was all well and good when they did not have any dementia or Alzheimer's disease, but now it's kicking in, and the younger adult who never really became fully their own person and took care of all of their own things is now saying they're the caregiver, and the kids on the outside are saying that's never been the case, and now she's more at risk. That is a tough one, because then we have a life pattern of choices and a love for this child and a guilt and a lot of mixed up emotions. So we'll tease those through and still want to make sure that even if the children in that situation want to block mom from this less functional sibling, if mom loves that sibling, we're not going to let that happen. Because one thing about Lindsay's presentation I wanted to say too that's very important is she's right. The clients when you have Alzheimer's or dementia, and actually just natural aging, the facts become less important and feelings become more. The clients won't remember what you said to them and what the details of a conversation, but they will remember how you made them feel. So a lot of times we're assessing the client's feelings, their feelings about, even if they're having delusions, what is your feeling about that delusion? What's your feeling about your children, your child? I might ask open-ended question, who do you trust the most? But they have a right to make the quote-unquote wrong decision if they are capacitated enough. And early dementia, Virginia is very conservative, and so no one's going to have their rights taken away with early dementia. And again, we still like to say in our field, capacity to do what? Okay, next slide. I'll hurry it up. I know we had to get to questions, but yeah, for reporting, my workers are going to want to know, what did you actually see for yourself and what are you hearing about from other neighbors? So you might want to actually have the neighbor that has the most interaction with your community member make the call to Adult Protective Services, because we're going to want to get to that person by reminding them that they can be anonymous. Names, contact information for anything that's often on the refrigerator, right, or the back of the door, anything you have about family members or friends, social supports, household members who might be staying there periodically, not really living there, but coming and going, emergency and safety concerns. So, the biggest things for me that I worry about the most are fires that have been occurred. Falls are a big one. Driving, a lot of danger there. Those are the acute. And then medications, not taking seizure, anti-seizure, or diabetic medications. Certain medications are more important than others. Does the client have a legal representative? That person may be a good guy or a bad guy or everything in between, but do they exist? Is there really paperwork on that? And the location of the client, so we can go out there. We are still doing home visits. We have masks. We use the police to help us. We're doing fewer. We're not going into, we usually go into facilities. We're not going in right now. But typically we're going to get physically present with the client alone and be talking to them, not with the potential abuser. But if it's self-neglect, of course, that's one and the same. But if there's a person we're concerned about, that's going to be two separate interviews. And any other financial, environmental, physical, mental, or medical information. You may have none of that. You might just have concerns and an address. We could probably check out what their name is. So anything you have, please call us. About half of them are validated and half are invalid, but we'll still talk to you about it. And even if it's invalid this time, it might be valid later, and we keep all records, again, confidential in one system so we can see if there's a pattern. Next slide. Okay, you're always going to be confidential. That's the state law. We'll get in big trouble if we tell you your name. So that's a lock. That's absolutely for sure. Next one. Okay, so we are that 703-324-7450. That is our number. And again, even at midnight, you could call. I like 8 to 4:30 better because you'll get a local person here in Fairfax County. We're in our offices near the government center. And so we'll know our clients better than Richmond will, but anytime you could make that call. And is there any other slide? Oh yeah, I think I went over this. We can go again. It's our philosophy. Okay, great. So now Q&A, I think.
Robin, have any questions come in today?
We have not received any questions as of yet.
Well, just a reminder to everyone, if you do have any questions or comments, you can type those into the question box in your control panel. And to get in touch with either Insight Memory Care Center or Fairfax County Adult Protective Services, you see the links there on your screen, as well as the phone numbers. And I'll pass it back to Robin.
All right, well, thank you so much for all of you for attending this webinar today, and thank you so much to Lindsay and Karen. I think we have a lot of information received, and hopefully you feel a little bit more equipped to help your neighbors, you know, as that's what we're all here for, is to be a community and to help our neighbors to be more included in our community. So anyways, I just wanted to thank you for attending this webinar, and we hope you will join us for our next one, the final one in our 4-part webinar series. The next one is on June 19th at 11 o'clock, and it's Recognizing Caregiver Burnout, and Marquita Brown with Insight Memory Care Center will lead that one. And if you are interested in learning more about Dementia Friendly Fairfax, there's a website right there to go to Insight's website. You can learn more, learn about when the meetings are being held, and get involved. And looking forward to seeing you at a future meeting and having you attend future webinars as well. So thank you so much. And I know there is a evaluation to fill out as well at the end of this. So if you can please fill out the evaluation, that will greatly help us as well. So thank you so much.